Welcome back to Apolitical. Thank you guys so much for tuning in another week. I really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So last week, we discussed the Defend the Atlanta Forest movement. If you missed the show, this is a movement started by local climate activists after learning that hundreds of acres of forest land in Southwest DeKalb is about to be chopped down to make room for both a new police training facility and the expansion of a movie studio in DeKalb County called Black Hawk Studios. So if you missed last week's episode, I highly suggest you check it out after you finish listening to this one. It was a really enlightening conversation with a organizer from the Defend the Atlanta Forest movement. Thank you so much again to May for taking the time to come on. But this week, we're going to be talking to Kelly-Jeanne Lee. Kelly is a 2021 candidate for City Council in District 1. The Atlanta Forest sits just outside of her district, so both of these developments, both the movie studio and the new police facility, would affect the day-to-day lives of many of her constituents. So I wanted to bring her on the show to get her take on this and learn a little bit more about her candidacy. So coming up is our interview with District 1 City Council candidate Kelly-Jeanne Lee. Stay tuned. All right, so we are back with Kelly-Jeanne Lee. She's a candidate for City Council in District 1 this year. Kelly, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So last week we had Defend the Atlanta Forest on, and we spoke at length about the new proposed police training facility that the mayor and other city leaders want to see built on the grounds of the old Atlanta prison farm, which is just outside of your district in Southeast Atlanta, District 1. So how do you feel about a new police training facility potentially being built so close to your district?
So I have seen only one real argument in favor of the police training facility and a lot of arguments against. And the argument for doesn't really hold a lot of water with me. You know, the argument that I've seen is that the police feel that their recruitment issue is based on not having sufficient training facilities. I don't know about you, but I've never taken a job based on the training facility that I would be experiencing in the course of that. Right. I think that the recruitment issue that our police are having is a bigger conversation about the way our community is thinking about policing. And I think until that conversation is more resolved, the recruitment situation that they're having is probably going to continue with or without a new training facility. And so I don't think that argument really holds any water. The arguments against, there are so many, and they're by so many people that I honestly don't understand how it's a conversation that we're even still having. You know, there are environmental arguments. There are arguments about representation. When we think about it's unincorporated DeKalb County, it's owned by the city of Atlanta. They haven't really been taking public comment from the people who would be most impacted by it, the neighbors that surround it. You know, we think about the ways that also we treat our history, right? So the Chattahoochee Brick Factory has just become, you know, through the struggle is now going to be a park. And so if we would memorialize the people that suffered there, why would we not memorialize the people that suffered at the Honor Farm? And we can't pretend that that didn't happen. I also think, and so, you know, this kind of is maybe a little bit out of left field, but I don't think that nature and wilderness are a luxury. And so we have lots of parks in Atlanta, but most of them are mowed lawns. And so a park that is a truly wilderness park within 285, where lower income, less, you know, car enabled people are able to access it, it changes the way that our children think about nature to have that level of experience. And so that will change the way that as they grow up, that they think about and they steward the nature in our community. And so if we want to raise a generation of kids of all income levels, of all backgrounds, who have an appreciation for nature, we need to provide access to that in a way that is reasonable. And so, you know, there's that argument. Also, I know that if you are detonating bombs and lighting things on fire, there are going to be environmental impacts and air quality impacts. And so the neighbors around there who have already been inhaling a variety of things from the industrial sites around it, adding to that, the air quality and health impacts on our residents of whatever gases and smokes are being emitted by a police training facility that involves, live fire detonation, can't be discounted. You know, when you think about asthma rates, they're typically higher in lower income communities that are impacted by industrial facilities that are right in and among housing. And so there are houses right there. There are people who live in those houses, and so they're not being consulted, and their long-term health is at risk. And so, I mean, I could go on. There's so many counter
arguments against it. I love what you said about our kids and how they need to have access to nature and know the importance of it, because climate change is real. And I feel like for the most part, most of us don't learn about the importance of nature as kids.
Right. And we call ourselves a city in the forest, and really we're a city with a lot of trees. And so really to be truly a city in the forest, let's have a forest. Let's have a truly wild space that we can claim as our own. Yeah,
I definitely agree. So last week, Councilwoman Joyce Shepherd held a press conference where she basically explained that the current police facility and firefighters facilities are in shambles.
The police and the fire academy both are so bad at this point that we're having to move them out, the police employees and the fire employees, out of the training facilities that are in my district, police and fire. They're old, dilapidated schools, mold, mildew, sewage backup, can't drink water out of the fountains, can't use the water in the buildings, leaking roof, you name it.
I think she called them old and dilapidated. But my question is, do you think a new police academy is necessary even if it's not built at the old Atlanta prison farm?
So Joyce was actually Councilwoman Shepherd was at our NPU meeting last night. And so she gave a very similar presentation. We were a little bit short on time and hoping that we could bring her back at the end, but there were some zoning issues that ended up taking a significant portion of the time. However, she was talking about things like mold. If there's a mold problem, I think mold remediation, that's an OSHA issue and that needs to be handled. That's the safety of anybody who's working in that building. And so if there are unsafe conditions, absolutely unsafe conditions should be remediated. We shouldn't be sending anybody, I've taught in school buildings that had mold issues, and you know how that impacts the employees of all levels, right? And for us, it was kids also. There won't be any children there, but if there are working conditions that are not within line of what we would want for ourselves, sure, spend some money on that. But having a whole new police training facility in the middle of a wilderness area that has taken no real meaningful community input from the people who actually will be surrounding that facility, I don't think is a reasonable thing to do.
Fair. Let's move on to housing, because I watched you at the CBA candidate forum and you mentioned legacy residents being pushed out of their neighborhoods, being a huge problem in your district, specifically something that you would be looking to address. You said that the city needs to diversify the types of homes available to residents. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like to you?
Sure. So housing is a very multifaceted issue. And so when we talk about housing, we have to think about it on a number of levels. One, we do have to think about protecting our legacy residents. It protects the diversity of our community. I love my neighborhood. And one of the things I love about it is that there are a ton of different types of people of all races and socioeconomic backgrounds and ages that all live within the same general area. And so my community is enriched by having a variety of types of people in my surrounding. I learned from them. They learn, hopefully, maybe from me. I don't know. And we work together on projects that benefit the whole community with an eye towards our past and an eye towards our future. And I think that that's something that's irreplaceable. So that's one thing. We also have to think about equity options. So we don't have a ton of equity options for people to buy into the market that are affordable within District 1. I talk a lot about my home buying journey. The bank gave us a budget of $130,000 because I'm a teacher and wasn't yet married. And so you can't buy a house in this district on a teacher's salary, which is a fairly should be middle of the road sort of a salary. And so thinking about young families, young couples, people who are just starting out, there really isn't that much that they can buy. And so thinking about some of the Atlanta City housing design propositions, they have really been pushing ADUs, and there's accessory dwelling units, and there is a real controversy about how that should be handled. But when you have a home where you can build an accessory dwelling unit in the back, so like a cottage conversion from a garage, you as the homeowner have a passive income stream that supports your ability to afford your mortgage. And so that impacts our legacy homeowners because they can have this passive income stream, but also that could help a young family afford their mortgage and stay afloat in that and have a buy into the equity market. Yeah. We have a lot of communities or a lot of parts of our community that were historically discriminated against in buying homes to begin with. And so having a greater diversity of types of homes to buy, types of homes, single family on a smaller scale, or, some level of townhome and condos. And I know that that is really controversial to a lot of people, but I think it can be done in a way that is respectful of the aesthetics of the neighborhood, such that people who've been discriminated against in the housing market, who aren't inheriting, generational wealth, who aren't inheriting properties themselves, have an ability to buy into the market and start building that for their future. And that's really important. And there's also talking about affordable rental stuff, which I know wasn't your question. So housing touches everything. Yeah. It touches literally every part of everything I think about.
Huge. We can be here all day.
Yes.
But I do want to break down a little, because you said a lot. So accessory dwelling units, they currently aren't allowed in your district specifically?
No, they are. So they're changing the zoning to allow them. Okay. And so they are allowed. Sorry. They recently changed the zoning to allow them. And so there's controversy over whether, they should be able to be detached and sold you could subdivide your property and sell them, or whether they should remain attached to the main property. It seems reasonable if they're calling it an accessory dwelling that it should remain attached to the main property and should be a way of supporting the homeowner in maintaining their mortgage. It also allows somebody who is a renter, who doesn't want to live in a big giant apartment building. A lot of people are really against having big apartment complexes in their neighborhood because it doesn't look like the neighborhood. It doesn't look like the neighborhood that they're used to. And, there's a lot that can be said to unpack the levels of things within that statement. However, if people are against big apartment complexes, then we should be especially pushing hard on other options to make sure that we can have people that can afford homes, that can rent, that have access to, or gives them access to a neighborhood. It gives them access to neighborhood schools. It gives them access to that dignity and that feeling of community that I think everybody deserves.
Me too. What up, y'all? We are taking a quick break from our interview with Kelly-Jeanne Lee so that I can tell you guys about Gratitude Botanical Farm. This is a Black-owned farm on the west side of Atlanta near Adamsville, and they're committed to providing fresh food and produce to our communities. So they sell fresh produce from their farm every week. You can order it on their website, or you can DM them on Instagram to place an order. They also have a volunteer day once a month, so you can come out as a volunteer and actually help them manage the land. So I definitely think that we should all be supporting these Black farmers. You can find them on Instagram at Gratitude Botanical Farm, and their website is gratitudeatl.com. All right, let's get back to the interview. All right, so let's move on to crime. This is probably the biggest issue that local leaders have had to address over the past year. The murder rate in Atlanta is the highest it's been in decades. So how do you think the city should go about improving public safety?
So if there was one single bullet solution or silver bullet solution to the murder rate and forgive me for using a bullet metaphor when it comes to the murder rate, but if there were one single solution to this problem, I think somebody would have come upon it by now. And I want to start by saying that our murder rate was already too high before this recent spike, and it's horrific that we're seeing this level of additional impacts on our communities. However, this is not a problem that you can arrest your way out of. The police show up after somebody is already dead. And so in order to prevent murders or to help decrease the amount of murders, decrease the amount of violent crime in our community, we need to start from a different source. And for me, that is dignified, affordable housing, that is workforce development, and making sure especially that our non-college bound high school youth have job training, have places to go that give them meaning and purpose. When you look at the statistics, the majority of people that are committing these crimes are between 18 and 25, 18 and 30. And so, that's the age when, quote unquote, typically people would be in college. And so when we have students, and college is not for everybody, honestly. I wish I'd taken a gap year myself, at least one. Right. But when we have kids that are in that range that are committing the majority of the incidents that we're seeing, it means that we're not doing enough for them to make sure that they have what they need to be a productive member of our society. And so for me, crime rate is too high. Absolutely. The murder rate is incredibly high, 100%, but we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. We need to work backwards from a different source to try to improve the overall quality of life for our most vulnerable.
How do we How do we actually get there? Because programs exist. I think I just read that the city hired 1,000 teens this summer.
That was in an attempt to sort of stem the water boy situation, I think, which is a whole other ball of wax.
Yeah. But how do we better fund these programs as a city?
We give a ton of tax breaks to corporations that are building buildings in our community, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be asking for more from them. And whether that's a funding stream for this or whether that is specific workforce development programs within their corporations that can support our youth in becoming employees of theirs eventually or working in that industry. If we're going to give the level of tax break that we give to some of the corporations that are building buildings in our city, we should be asking for more in return. And this is one of those things that we can ask.
Yeah. You also said something I loved at the CBA forum about a person with a gun not having to be the person to respond to every single incident. Can you talk a little bit about how we as a city can actually make that a reality?
Sure. We have a fantastic initiative in Atlanta, the Police Alternatives and Diversion Initiative, and what they're doing and, hasn't been getting enough recognition, but it's making sure that we as citizens we don't have to call 911 for everything. And so if people are having a mental health concern, if people are, exhibiting basically survival behaviors that are outside of what we consider either couth or the law, they're eating food out of dumpsters, they're sleeping in public. We don't need people with guns. We don't need police showing up for that. We need community advocates. We need, if it's a mental health issue, we need social workers and mental health advocates. And so their organization is making sure that we have alternatives, which is part of their name, to calling 911 so that people without guns can respond to non-gun needing situations. And so there needs to be more support for that. The city is completely on board with it and has done a lot of support. And they're actually now citywide as of 2 days ago, maybe. They're a citywide organization or a citywide effort. But the police themselves actually give their officers points for how many people they can arrest and how many people they can charge, but they don't reward them similarly for how many cases that they can divert to better agencies. And so for me, that's a no-brainer. We can divert at the source, but not everybody knows to divert at the source. And so if someone does call 911, we need another layer of diversion so that we can make sure that the police are responding where police are needed. Yeah. It also frees up their bandwidth to respond to things more. So people talk about police response times being low. If they don't have to respond to situations that are not a violent situation, if they don't have to respond to every person sleeping on a park bench and every person who is experiencing a mental health conflict or crisis, they can divert their energy more toward the things that people want them there for, whereas we can support our community in different ways from the other side.
Agreed. I love the work that Pat Atlanta is doing, and they definitely deserve more support, more credit, more recognition, all of that. But another major issue that City Council has been debating over the past couple of months is the future of the Atlanta City Jail. The mayor is still pushing heavily for it to be closed and converted into some sort of center for equity. So where do you stand on the future of the city jail, especially considering the overcrowding issues taking place at Fulton County Jail right now?
Right. So closing that facility as a prison, I think or as a jail is crucial to our community. It was essentially a debtor's prison. So it was for people who couldn't afford cash bail, who couldn't afford their fines. And so it's something that I think we as a community are moving away from that being one of our values. Hopefully it was never one of our values, but maybe people just didn't think about it that hard. But now that we're having a real in-depth conversation about policing and about jail and about the whole prison industrial system, I think that we are setting our values as a community, and that is not one of them. And so turning that space into a space that can provide services for some of our most vulnerable, for people who may be suffering from the generational impacts of their family members having been incarcerated, I think is a great service to our community. Yeah, and we'll have to wait and see if the needle moves in either direction on that decision. Doesn't seem like it will anytime soon. But no, now I want to move on and talk a little bit more about the person, Kelly. And not the future politicians. So where are you from? Sure. So I'm from the Philadelphia metro area. Okay. My parents got married and divorced a bunch of times. And so I moved around a lot. I was mostly raised by a single mom. Luckily, we were able to stay in the same school district the whole time and find affordable rental housing in a good school district, which is something that we struggle with here in Atlanta. Yeah. And so that's where I'm from. I went to school in Vermont. I've lived in a couple of different places, including briefly in Spain. I took a semester abroad in Spain in high school, which is how I'm a Spanish teacher now, that is what I do. My kids ask me all the time where I'm from. Like, no, I'm from Philadelphia. I'm just a white person. I just happen to speak Spanish. Right. So I'm from Southeast Philadelphia. I've lived sort of a lot of different places in the metro area. And then again, went to school in Vermont and took a semester abroad in Spain. But I actually came to Atlanta because of Teach for America. So I was a Teach for America teacher. I had been in just a bad marriage, and had been, trying to find myself a little bit. And my marriage unfortunately became abusive. And so I left and just needed to start over. And so for me, starting over really meant finding my purpose, in addition to I needed a place to live and I needed, I needed to start over. Right. And so I started working for a nonprofit that supports at-risk youth in art education to try to get them scholarships to, art colleges so that they can actually become something that is, they feel passionately about. And so graphic design and things like that are commercial art skills. So I was working in a program that supported that. And then watching the school district that we were working alongside, the city where this program is, basically blamed their budget shortfall on the school district and was just going to close the schools. Like, we don't have any money for things, so it's the school's fault, so we're just going to close the schools. And so at that moment, I just really felt like I can't do enough from where I am. I need to get into the classroom, and I researched ways to become a teacher, and Teach for America is something that I had heard of, and they really approach teaching from a model of service and making sure that we have the greatest impact on a community. And so it wasn't enough for me to just take a couple classes or do an alternative certification program. I really wanted to do something that had a strong impact on a community. And they let you have some level of choice about where you move. And Atlanta just felt like a place where I could set down roots and make a family and start over. And all of that happened. And so I've been able to buy a home. I'm remarried. I have a little girl who is the apple of my eye. She is just about to be 3. She is the running, jumping, climbing all over everything phase, and it's so much fun. Yeah. But also I feel really invested in my community. And it's something that, we bought our house almost 6 years ago, and I've lived here since 2014. So it's definitely, I'm a newer resident of the city, but I don't think that has any bearing on my love for the city and my willingness to serve.
Oh yeah, no, 6 years, you're here now. That's a while. So you talked about the community. Can you explain to our listeners where District 1 is located and what neighborhoods make up the district?
Absolutely. So District 1 is a big rectangle. So the top of the rectangle is just over I-20. There is a strip of it that sort of faces Oakland Cemetery. And then you go south of 20, and it's Olive Grant Park, Ormwood Park. I'm not going to do these in order. I'm going to forget somebody. Grant Park, Ormwood Park, Chesapeake Park, Summerhill, little tiny piece of Peoplestown, Lakewood Heights, Lakewood proper, Boulevard Heights. There are a bunch of small neighborhoods that are sort of named just after the cross streets. Mm-hmm. We have Layla Valley. We have Rebel Forest, which is the closest neighborhood actually to that prison farm complex, is the Layla Valley sort of Rebel Forest area. Rebel Forest needs a whole new name, which is a whole other conversation. Anyway, let's not go there.
We won't go there. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Amazing. So, elections are coming. What's the actual date?
November the 2nd.
November the 2nd, coming up on us. Where can our listeners keep up with you, keep up with your campaign?
Sure. So my website is KJL, for either the number or the word, I got both, ATL.com. So KJL4ATL.com. It's also my Instagram handle with the number KJL, the number 4ATL. And I have a TikTok. Maybe I'll make some TikToks at some point.
Same way, I can't figure it out.
I've made a couple about hiking.
Nice.
but it was a while ago. But yeah, I have a dream of making a TikTok. It's gonna happen.
We both have.
I'm gonna do it though, for real. I'm gonna make a TikTok.
All right, Kelly, thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate it, and I know the people of District 1 will appreciate it as well.
Awesome, Kendall. Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. All right, that is going to wrap another episode of A-Political. Thank you guys so much for tuning in another week. Thanks again to Kelly-Jeanne Lee for taking the time to come on the show. We really appreciate it. And yeah, as usual, make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you're listening. And make sure that you're following our network, Atlanta Decoded, on Instagram and Twitter at Atlanta Decoded. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week. See ya.